издание на Еврозум ќе зборуваме за екологијата и чистиот воздух, проблем со кој деновиве се соочува Скопје, посебно, а и некои други градови во Европа. Гостин во Еврозум е портпаролот на директоратот за екологија во Европската комисија и портпарол на комесарот Поточник, господинот Джо Хенон. Mr. Henon, welcome in my program. Many cities in Europe in this period of the year are facing the serious problem with air pollution. What European Commission is doing in order to tackle this problem?
Well, we adopted a very big package of legislation yesterday, and we're looking at two things: enforcing the existing rules, because there are 17 member states who are not meeting the pollution norms at the moment, and then also looking beyond that to 2030 and beyond that to 2050, because let me just explain the problem. We have 400,000 people die early every year in the European Union because of air pollution.
400,000?
400,000, and that doesn't take into account...
How do you know, by the way, that it's because of the air pollution?
Because we've had lots of research and mostly studies done by the World Health Organization into exactly what causes these different types of illness. So mostly it's fine dust, particulate matter, so PM 2.5, but also ozone. So we know the figures, we know it's a huge problem, and we know that the latest World Health Organization standards suggest that we should go much, much further as well, because they say 90% of the EU population is at risk. So we need to do something about it. We are in the process of taking a large number of member states along the track towards the court if they don't observe the current measures. And yesterday we introduced new ceilings for at least 6 major pollutants, where we want to reduce them by 70% by 2030.
But what are you doing in a situation like right now in Paris, for example? Paris has a huge problem, Barcelona too.
Yeah, France is one of the countries which we will take to court if we have to. And it's not just Paris. In France there's at least 12 big cities where you have a problem with either PM, so that's fine dust, particulate matter, which mostly comes from diesel engines, and also then from nitrogen dioxide. So we will take countries like France to court if we have to, but we would much rather that they would fix the problem.
What they have to do in order to avoid the court?
They need to have plans in place which show that they can credibly meet the limits. So at the moment we have annual limits and you have daily limits. And in many French cities they're in breach of those limits. So they need to be able, first of all, to fix the problem in the short term, and then show us that they can continue to keep it fixed. So, and most of the problem comes from traffic, but also from heating installations and from small industrial plants. So we need to tackle it on all of those fronts.
What are the best practices that you have noted, listed so far, dealing with the critical situation with air pollution?
Well, a combination of things. There are best practices in some member states. Some of them have got away with burning solid fuel. So Ireland, for example, used to have a big problem with, in Dublin, burning coal, and they don't do that anymore. There are other cities like Amsterdam where they have huge part of the population are cycling, and the same in Copenhagen. You also have cities where you have low emission areas, so you don't have trucks allowed. You have pedestrianised areas, cycle paths, more public transport, speed limits. So it's a combination of all of these things. There's not just one solution, because if there was, everybody would have applied it by now.
What are the hotspots in Europe?
There are quite a lot. Bulgaria is the worst. So there are several cities in Bulgaria which are constantly exceeding the norms.
You are talking about the 28 now, member states?
Yeah, of the 28 member states, yeah, you have Bulgaria, Poland, parts of Poland is particularly bad. But you also have some of the best known cities like Milan, Paris, and most of the other major cities, Graz in Austria, for example. But each country has its own problem. So as I say, there are 17 countries where we have a problem, and within those countries there might just be one city, but in some of them there are quite a lot of cities or zones. So it's something which certainly the industrial countries really need to tackle.
What's your assessment about the situation in the Western Balkan region, especially Macedonia, I mean, my country?
Yeah.
Having in mind that last year Sarajevo in Bosnia and Skopje, capital of Macedonia, they were listed as the most polluted city in Europe.
Yeah.
there was a Guardian research.
Yeah, we don't have comprehensive databases, but from what we know, there is not a single country in the Western Balkans that does not have an air pollution problem. So all of them, if you look at the EU norms at the moment, all of them would fail to meet the criteria.
What's the difference between them, Western Balkans country, and the member states, let's say?
If you look at member states like Bulgaria, there's not that much difference. So they're in the same category, say, as Bulgaria or parts of Poland and Greece. So it seems to be common to the region, and it's something which, for the sake of the public health, not just the environment. I mean, there's an effect on the environment in terms of crop yields, and also in ecosystems, but more directly, it's people's health. And it's really something that all the governments need to take seriously. And when we hear people say it will cost a lot, well, actually, our figures show that you will save 12 times as much on the health budget as you do on spending money to fix the problem. So it's really a false argument to say we can't afford to solve the air pollution problem. Yes, you can, because if you don't, you'll spend much more money on people who are dying, people who are sick, people who can't work, and your economy will gain more from fixing the problem than from leaving it alone.
What about the situation in Macedonia?
Macedonia, again, I don't have exact figures, but we know that at the moment there are many zones in Macedonia which would fail the test for particulate matter. So Macedonia, only a couple of weeks ago, reported to the European Environment Agency for each of its designated zones, and we can see clearly that there's a problem in many zones in Macedonia.
And what's the assessment of the European Commission, having in mind that you're dealing also with within a progress report for Macedonia about the institutional capacity to tackle this problem?
We think for PM, for example, it's a problem that can be solved by local authorities and regional authorities, and simply managing the root causes. Traffic is a very big one. And if you can look at what happens in the best practices around the European Union, then there's a lot that can be learned about how you can reduce air pollution in cities. And when it comes to things like domestic heating or stoves that burn wood, for example, or coal, again, there are lessons to be learned in terms of better technology. There you can expect the European Union to provide money to help solve some of that kind of problem. So large combustion plants, for example, have to be fitted with filters, and you would expect that Macedonia would be given a longer period of time to fix that, because that does require investment. But you can also expect to receive EU help in terms of regional funds or research and development, or from Horizon 2020. So there will be EU money there to help, but part of the problem is management. So
what are the measures, having in mind that Skopje those days especially is in a very critical situation? Yeah. What Skopje could do in order to, to solve this
a range of
actual
things.
problem?
I mean, it would be the local authorities in Skopje who have the best idea as what can be done. But what has been done in other cities is, for example, trying to take cars off the road as much as possible by providing people with public transport. And encouraging cycling. So having safe cycle lanes for people and having a lot of them, that works. Having parts of the city where you don't allow trucks to go through, or parts of the city where you don't allow traffic at all. These measures have worked in other European cities where the local authority has really tackled the problem. And as I say, Copenhagen is a good example, where 30% of the people in Copenhagen use their bikes every day. But there are many ways, and even looking at diesel, for example, diesel cars are a big problem in France, and the French government actually heavily subsidizes diesel. So again, it's something you can look at in terms of what cars do you have on the road and what taxes do you put on them. Do you have green taxes? There's a range of measures that are shown to have worked.
One of the problems, of course, is economic development.
Yeah.
No money. I mean, well, and the situation with the pollution, the environment, is consequences of this economic situation.
Yeah.
So having in mind that all those instruments that has to be implemented in order to deal with the situation are very expensive. Yeah. So what do you think how Macedonia could resolve such a problem, having in mind the level of its economic development?
We hear the same argument, not just from Macedonia, but from countries like France, for example, or some of the more developed.
Saying no money.
They say that it will cost us a lot, and at the moment we have the economic crisis and the financial crisis, and unemployment is high, and therefore we should not invest in the environment. But that's a false argument, because by not investing in the environment, you're spending more money further down the line. As I said, our studies show that it costs the European economy between 300 billion euros to 900 billion euros every year in the health system, dealing with hospitalizing people, dealing with treating illnesses like asthma, and you have the knock-on effect every year on agriculture, on work practices, on workplaces, and our calculations show that it would cost about 3.5 billion every year in costs for the existing EU members to fix this problem, and that they would save them somewhere between 40 and 140 billion euros every year. So in fact, when they say that we can't really afford to do this, you have to say, well, what price do you put on human life, first of all? And how is your health system, how much money are you spending on healthcare because of this problem? And also, how much is your agriculture losing in reduced crop yields? How much damage is being done to the ecosystems that you depend on for clean water, for example? So it's really a question of looking at the bigger picture and not just saying that we can't afford to spend X amount of money on fixing the air pollution problem, because, as I say, it's really a false economy. It will save money in the long run.
Mr. Cannon, what's the average among the member states? How much money they have in their budget? What percentage of the budget is dedicated for air pollution or environment problem?
Environment in general, I don't have figures, but if you look at the EU budget, environment spending is a tiny percentage of the EU budget. And if that's replicated at national level, it varies from one country to another, and it depends what way you count it. But generally, environment spending is low, and people are talking about the need for industry and to be competitive and to have jobs, but they're not looking at the bigger picture.
When you say low, what means 1%,
well,
2%?
For example, the EU budget is less than 1%. So most of the EU budget, for example, goes on agriculture and research and on regional funding and many other things than the environment. And at national level, it varies from one country to another. But in general, we have the problem that people think the environment is a luxury. And in the long run, it certainly is not. I mean, everybody depends on clean air, clean water, and having ecosystems which provide us with the food and the water and clean air that we all need to live every day.
Since we're talking about the money, actually in Skopje there is a old factory, old installation factory, in which it's one of the main polluter.
Yeah.
So the government has asked the owners to take the necessary measures in order to spread the pollution. But the owners are saying, well, if we pay this amount of money, €1 million, well, for us it's better to close the factory, which means that many people are going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And it's a huge problem in the country. It has already 30% of unemployment.
Yeah.
What's the exit strategy for this kind of situation?
Well, again, that's a very familiar problem, because we hear it from Italy and many other countries as well, that it's better to have a factory that employs people. But then what do you do about the pollution that comes from that factory? And what about the effect on the other people who don't work there? If you look at the city of Taranto in Italy, we have a case involving the Ilva steel company, where you have the same argument. You have the owners of the company saying, we provide employment in the city, but then you have everybody else who lives in the city saying we're dying from lung cancer and our soil is being poisoned by hazardous chemicals. So it's a question of balance, but also the government needs to look at, do we invest in clean technology? Do we look to innovate? Do we use European money to help us to develop clean technology and maybe manufacture other things? Because if you look at even the vehicle sector in Europe, we're the world's leaders. 40% of Europe's companies now make a huge amount of money from their environment portfolios, and there are big opportunities for the people who can develop clean technology. It's a win-win situation. If you look, for example, around the world, air pollution is a huge problem now in places like China, where they're spending 0.5% of Chinese GDP is now being spent on tackling air pollution, and that's going to be replicated all across Asia and many other parts of the world. And the opportunities are there for European countries to develop the technology, to sell to those export markets, and to use them at home. And really, pollution-producing industries ought to be a thing of the past for the sake of the public as well. We need to move to a situation whereby we can produce goods without creating toxic pollution, which kills people. Let's face it, that's what we're talking about.
For the end, let us know, could you give us some example of the politicians who are a good role model in order to promote culture, friendly environmental culture? Your Commissioner Potočnik has decided to go in his office on foot for 1 week, I think. What about the other commissioners? Are they using their cars, big cars, Mercedes and BMW, I don't know?
I wouldn't have that kind of information, and I know how difficult it is for commissioners not to use their cars because they're going from one place to another for meetings all the time. My boss, is true, he left his car at home for a week during the summer, and he cycled and he walked, and he said at the end of the week, now I understand how difficult it is for people to do that, because when you have to go from one meeting to another during the day, the temptation is to say, I will take my car. But that's why cities need to provide somewhere safe for you to cycle or to walk, but they also need public transport. And whether it's a bus or a tram or a metro or a train or whatever, if the option is there, it can reduce the amount of traffic. So I'm not aware of which commissioners cycle on a frequent basis. I know a couple who do walk to work. Kallas, for example, who's the Estonian commissioner, lives reasonably close. But I'm sure he uses his car during the day like everybody else does.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview.
You're welcome.
Това беше интервјуто со портпаролот на комесарот за екологија, господин Поточник. Ви благодарам за вниманието и одгледање.